Hey folks, welcome back to my EarthGames project. As always, watch the first 4 parts to get some context for this video, if you haven't already. This video has been delayed quite a bit so that I could get my project to a point where I could explain my philosophy on UI, or user interface, for this project and strategy games in general. Unfortunately, this means that I have a lot to present in one video, so I'll try to be brief. As with the last part, the first half of this video will be dedicated to design process, and the last half will be more technical. I will be focusing on coding examples this time, since there was not much math involved. If you haven't noticed by now, my vision for this project is to make a turn-based strategy game. Strategy games, ranging from StarCraft to Crusader Kings, all have this in common: lots of UI. So much, in fact, that UI is the main way a player interacts with the game. Clunky UI can make a game boring or frustrating, but good UI can become almost transparent to the engaged player. If you take anything away from this video, it should be that there should always be multiple ways of accomplishing the same task using user interface. For instance, in addition to on-screen UI buttons, strategy games often include hotkeys that bind to each of these buttons. Strategy games that include a map of the world often have multiple ways of scrolling around that map. Move the mouse to the edge of the screen, click and drag on the screen, and click on the minimap in the corner, to name a few. Sid Meier's Civilization V also includes a big button that, when clicked, will either advance the turn or bring you to a place on the map where there are still moves to be made. Let's move on to my project as it is now, as I talk about the next principle, which is to only display information when the user asks for it. Sometimes windows and menus can clog up the screen, so until the user selects a tile on the globe, no UI is shown. Several features of this UI were mainly implemented to make it easier to navigate through the 10,000 tiles that make up the globe. As you hear, a sound is made every time the mouse passes over a new tile, and in the political map mode, the hovered tile is also highlighted in the selected country. There is also a menu to explore every tile that makes up a particular country, sortable by name, population, and latitude-longitude position. As I said, the main goal is to give the user as many different ways of accomplishing the same task as possible. To scroll through the locality list, the user can either click and drag or scroll with the mouse wheel. The user can also locate a particular locality by either hovering over tiles on the globe or by highlighting it in the locality list. There are 2 ways of opening up the locality list and 2 ways of closing the locality list. I also plan on adding hotkeys for this. One more principle that probably applies to every aspect of project management is, if you have an idea, just implement it as fast as possible. No need to worry about making it look nice. This is especially true for UI though. The UI I have shown here is by no means final, and is really kind of gray and ugly. This would be easy to change if I had the assets, but it would be way harder to change if I hadn't implemented the UI in the first place. So when you get started with UI, just roll with whatever you come up with. The goal here is to implement functionality, not come up with a perfect look right off the bat. The position, size, and appearance of UI elements is ultimately easy to change, thanks to Unity. One last detail is that I changed the globe to always be the static object. Before, the stars and sun were static by default while the globe turned, and you could hold the globe in place by clicking and holding. When I started adding interactivity, however, I realized that this was too distracting. So now the globe only turns when you want it to turn. First, I want to show you how to add UI itself. Add the little windows and whatnot. Because some of this is actually a bit unintuitive. So first, what you want to do is create a canvas. And this will start out as ridiculously large for whatever reason. I have no idea why. I have no idea what Unity was thinking on this, but basically, right now, what this canvas is doing is taking up the entire screen space. So if you put anything on here, it would be as if you're putting it on the screen. And that would be different from putting something in the space of this camera. So we want to change the render mode to world space. And now it's objects placed in this canvas are where you would expect them to be relative to the camera. Now, of course, this canvas is still gigantic. Your first thought might be to change the width and height of the canvas, but this is not what you should do. And I'll show you why. So if you put a text object in this canvas, then this text will also be huge. If you change the size of the canvas, it will not change the size of this text. So instead what you want to do is change the scale of the canvas. This will also change the scale of this text. Now you also want to make sure that you change both the x-axis and the y-axis by the same amount. If you change one by a different amount than the other, as you can see, let's see here. As you can see, this text gets squashed from what you would expect it to be. So what you want to do is make sure both of these numbers are the same, and a pretty reasonable number for the scale of a canvas is 0.006 for both numbers. I like to use that. And then just drag it into the camera view. Alright, this is a bit more reasonable. Now just drag it into the place you want to put it. And then it's time to add the actual UI. So if you wanted a background for this canvas, you could add a component on the canvas itself. Add a image, and that will automatically be just a white image, which is nice because you can just change the color to whatever you want. And it will at least be something. Later on, you could change this image to something that actually looks like a piece of user interface. I've left all of the user interface that I've made so far as just solid color images. But later on, I could add some images here that make it look better, I guess. Now, if you want to add like a section of the piece of user interface, you might add an image. And to position this image, instead of doing it manually, like clicking on here and resizing it or whatever, you might want to use this anchor preset, these anchor presets. You can press Alt to get these, to actually get these nice presets. You could set it in the corner or in the center or on the side in the center, or you could stretch it along a certain place, or you could make this image take up the whole canvas. So these are some nice presets, and you can see what they change. They change these anchors. So these anchors kind of determine what these values position the object relative to. So if it's this 0, 1, that would be in this corner, to 1, 1 to this corner, it's going to use these values to position it relative to the top edge of the parent object. And then of course you can change the position like this by changing these values. And then if you want to add some text in this, which I'm sure you would want to, just add a text object under the image, and of course set it to take up the whole space unless you want multiple text objects in here. And then you could change the font size and center it, maybe. And here we have our little title. Now, if you want to make a button, I haven't played around with this, but there is a UI button. I don't know how this works. It looks more complicated, but what I do is I just create an image, and then I use my own code to determine if the mouse is hovering over the image, or to determine if when the mouse clicks, if the mouse is hovering over the image. And that's where I would cause some behavior to happen as a result of clicking on the button. So my way is a little more complex, probably, ultimately, but I find it to be easier to understand what's going on than, I mean, I'm sure the button has some kind of event listener connected to it. So I would not want to deal with that, but you might. So that's basically how you create UI in general. And what I do to hide the UI, there are a couple ways to do this, by destroying the object and then reconstructing it in script. Or you could set this object to inactive. There's ways to do that. But what I like to do is just shift this object off the screen temporarily, and then I will shift it back using code. The reason I do this is because that means there will be a constant amount of performance used by the computer. In the locality list, this matters a lot because there are a lot of locality list items in here, and if I were to get rid of this by setting it inactive and setting it active all the time, it would take up a lot of performance rendering and unrendering all these locality list objects. So instead I just shift it off, and that will keep the program running at a constant performance level. One last thing I forgot to show is if you wanted to give this text some padding, like if you don't want the text to be near the edge of its parent, for example, if this is aligned to the left, then it's very close to the edge. So if you want to change that, you can just change the left, top, right, and bottom values. And if you're familiar with CSS from web programming, this is actually quite a good parallel with, I think it would be relative positioning in CSS. You can set the left, right, top, and bottom attributes of an element, and it will position similar to like how this text is positioning. And of course, if this were smaller, it's too close to the top, so you might want to pat it from there as well, and from the right and the bottom, just in case there's more text. So that's how you would do that. I think that's kind of where the similarities end with CSS. I really wish Unity was a lot more similar to CSS, because CSS is very intuitive, and in the way that elements sort of flow around each other, and you can make text respect each other's uh, position and whatnot. And there's a lot of options generally on everything that you can add. Like you can have a glowing effect on objects and whatnot, and text. So that's just what I have to say, but we'll just use what we can, because Unity is probably your best bet if you're a beginner in designing games. Alright, this video is already way too long, so I'm going to cut it here. I will be back in the next part where I'll just finish explaining the more technical parts of this process. For instance, I want to talk about how to reference particular parts of the UI through code. So if you're purely interested in design process, this will not be the video for you. Otherwise, stay tuned. There's a lot to talk about.